All right, Michael Tucker, I'm excited to talk about you and your Enneagram results.
Good. Let's go.
Excellent. Okay. So I know that you have been invited by multiple people to the Enneagram. So I'm happy to take it from the top and give you a sense, but do you want to speak to what has resonated with you or anything like that before we get started?
Yeah. I would probably say the biggest thing that resonated with me from the feedback that I received from the Enneagram is, I would say it's more of a confirmation
Hmm.
um, of like what I already knew, but I would say that it really, inside of that confirmation was the invitation and almost to degree some activation to like move more aggressively into that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Invitation, activation, and aggressive. Those are all words we're gonna look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. In that invitation and activation, how did it feel?
It felt very natural.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. All right. So you scored as a type 7, which is the enthusiastic visionary, which based on as your podcast and your entrepreneurial lifestyle and your success in multiple avenues of different kind of entrepreneurship, that does not surprise me at all. Like to me, sevens are constantly invited and looking for invitations to life and living, determining what is their best self, how do they live kind of out loud, and what does that look like? So it seems like that lands for you.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So one of the things, some of the stuff we'll talk about is just kind of what it means to be a type 7 and make sure that that really resonates for you. We're also going to talk about your instincts and some thinking, feeling, and action centers. So one of the things revealed on your report that I think is interesting, and I usually start with, is you scored as ready, fire, aim. So
Yeah.
okay. Oftentimes when I say that to people, there's some resonance there. So what's coming up for you as I say that?
Yeah. I can relate to that. I can relate to that. In the sense that I see where I see a picture of the future and I just move in that direction. And I don't always plan every little detail out.
Mhm.
And that works for me sometimes that doesn't work for me. Because by the time I get to the objective or I get close to objective, then it's like, oh my gosh, I probably should have packed a sleeping bag,
Mhm.
or some extra clothes or whatever. Um, but I'm just, yeah, I see and I move. Um, and I feel like I'm getting a little better at that planning and preparation, and or at least just honoring the importance of it.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's still a work in progress.
Okay. Well, there's no judgment there. We all have a order. It's just for those who score highest in the feeling center with the feelings most expressed, you likely see a warmth and a relationship focus, which is very, I would say, is matches my experience of you. Then you're likely to take that decisive action. What's interesting is 7 is a thinking type, but the thinking is the kind of least expressed. So it's kind of the afterthought. So one of the centers has to be most, and one of the centers has to be least expressed. So there's not necessarily it's not a critique there. It's just something to think about. What's interesting to me though is that as you talk about sleeping bag, you actually scored highest on self-preservation. So I wonder if that's maybe what you were thinking about. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. But it sounds like those two might be related. So I'll give you a little bit more insight, and then this is about you. So respond or let me know if it doesn't land.
Yeah.
So from a feeling perspective, you scored feeling as a 3. So what's interesting in the kind of tri-type, or what the integrative Enneagram calls the centers of expression, your highest score in each kind of the feeling center, the action center, and the thinking center, you scored as a 3, then an 8, then a 7. So even though 7 is your primary type, you're likely to feel like a 3, be very focused on achievement, be very success oriented, Sometimes threes can be disconnected from their feelings or their expression of feelings. You're likely to take kind of confident, intuitive, decisive action like an eight would. And then when you think about things, you're thinking about the kind of infinite possibilities. You're able to see things that other people don't see. So when you think about a focus on achievement and decisive action and thinking about possibilities, how does that land for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of that's true. I'm one of these people that I believe that it does you no good to have a very big vision if you're not going to move in that direction and you're not going to be intentional about creating some results. It's like what are you doing otherwise? So yeah, that very much lands.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point for why potentially your thinking center does come last because you're like, well, what are you going to do? That's a action. How does it feel? Because here's the other thing, you do score highest in the feeling center. So if it doesn't feel right, you're not necessarily going to take that confident action. But, while you may be able to think about the different possibilities, for you, just talking about those things or just thinking about those things without the action may not have as much resonance.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I
Okay.
mean, I would say that thinking is important, and I feel like for a long time it was kind of like a really important thing in my life, and I do think, of course we all do, but were you talking about the feeling and moving into this visionary type of action? I feel like as I've gotten older, I've been a lot more intentional about that.
Yeah. Good. Good. So one of the things I noticed to have the kind of tri-type as 873, that's all three of the assertive types. So what may happen for you, and we can speak to this today or not, what's interesting to me is that you are so likely to approach something directly and confidently and with assertion, or you even said aggressive. So one of the things that may be a factor, because you scored predominantly as type 7, you likely have a level of enthusiasm, persuasion, and charisma that you can get away with it. But I also think about from a kind of working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sometimes when you're challenging people or challenging people's bias, your very direct approach could potentially run into some conflict with people who aren't as comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's something that's noticeable to me, because you're not likely to yield, at least according to your test results.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Like it depends. What I will say is that, yeah, even though I make an effort to move decisively, I really try to do my best to like check in and like really be present with the people that I'm with.
Mhm.
Because that relationship that you talked about earlier is important, that partnership is important. And so the ideal situation is we're moving aggressively because we're all on the same train with the same intention. And if we're not, then I'm not going to move anywhere with you.
Got it.
Yeah, until that's really cultivated, or we decide that maybe we need to just go separate ways or whatever.
Okay. Look at that decisive action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of the things we look at. So our defaults are our defaults for a reason, and our strengths are our strengths for a reason. And they're usually where we have a primary strategy. However, because whenever anyone has a kind of dominance, it's something that I point it out because it's like, hey, this is probably not even conscious for you. So one of the things to think about as you're working with people, as you're supporting clients just in your life, is that if someone doesn't take the what you call aggressive approach towards success, towards results, towards change, that's likely to not be a match for you. And so also, however, your instinct and your type, the key word it comes up with is network. And because you're strong in that feeling center, you are so strong at relationships. You have that sevens kind of positivity, I find even with my 7 wing, it's like there's a positive influence out into the world and there's a positive assertion. So if you were an 8 or a 3 versus a 7, that level of assertion, while in a kind of corporate setting, may go well. Sometimes in a racial relationship setting or in a personal setting, you may run into more kind of conflict there. But what's interesting is you look at the positivity of the 7, it may be landing better, but it's a heads up. You're probably aware of it already. But when someone else's default is not towards that level of kind of speed or the direct approach, that's not going to be a match.
Usually, yeah. Yeah, that's generally the case. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's food for thought. You're able to still see the bright side. So, one of the things that 7s score high in is what's called positive outlook versus the 8s who are potentially more reactive. So you are still really able to kind of look at the good and drive towards that. But I bring that up because our strengths and overuse can be our blind spots. And so sometimes, even if you're challenging people with good intent, that can potentially be more intimidating than you realize.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. That's really, really good to know. And it's interesting because I like to think that I'm doing a good job of creating support so that that space for challenge could potentially be there. But I think it's good to know that, well, maybe sometimes that's not the case, and to really like lean into that and don't make an assumption that that foundation is there. So yeah, that's helpful.
And I'm not saying that you're not, but as an 8, one of the things that 8s have to be conscious of is that the direct approach is so second nature to us. It's such a relief. It's like a breath of fresh air. Like, oh, we're not going to beat around the bush. Like, even if you don't like me, you're going to say it to my face. Like, tell me to my face, right? Like, do it professionally, but tell me to my face so I know what we're actually dealing with. There's such a relief and a preferred approach for the direct, so that because there are only 3 assertive types and you clocked in high on all 3. So just with that, even with you and I and the way that we connected and get along, and it's like part of the reason why our style and fit is a match. I think it's just important to us because we naturally have the issues that you're helping people face in your work, in coaching, in diversity, equity, inclusion. It's important for those things to be head on. And I'm sure, dealt with things in your life because of those things where you'd had to maybe take other strategies. You just have a strong preference toward your preferred strategy. And what I find for myself is after the fact, people will say that I'm intimidating. Sometimes it's even people that I know already and care about. And we have different kind of gender and racial dynamics that are laying on that. So I'm not telling you to tone it down. I'm just saying it's important to be aware of. You may not realize the strength with which you show up, and you're able to likely use that very positively, but it's food for thought.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's helpful.
Okay, good. So from an instinct perspective, so there's different instincts, and we all have all of the instincts, but you scored highest as self-preservation. So what's interesting, as you said about the sleeping bag, the folks that are likely to have the sleeping bag and the power charger and know where their exits are. I do wonder, honestly, from just kind of an upbringing perspective, sometimes like where people grew up or the kind of different circumstances that they've grown up in may impact how they look at the world or see the world. It sounds like for you, thinking about that sleeping bag comes after the fact, but your assessment results indicates that that's actually your primary instinct. So I wonder if perhaps that's primary because you've been intentional about it, or if you're often kind of focused on security and safety.
That's a really difficult question. I mean, I think it feels normal and it feels natural for me to it's interesting. Like I would definitely say that I'm visionary, I'm a risk taker, but I'm also very cautious.
Calculated risk.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a calculated risk taker. And so
Yeah.
if it looks adventurous and it looks a little too crazy, then I'm probably not going to do that.
Okay.
But if it looks adventurous and there's a strong possibility that there's some good that can come out of it, I'm going to run with it, and I'm going to run hard. And I will do my
Because that's
best.
the only way you run.
That's yeah, it is because the thing is, if for me, when I'm not running hard, then I know that I'm out of alignment.
Mm.
So something's not in alignment. I'm not in agreement with something. And maybe I haven't voiced that first and foremost to myself, and then to those folks that I'm with. But yeah,
That's beautiful. I can feel that. I feel that. And to me, that very much expresses the ready, fire, aim. Because if you're not feeling it, it's coming out in your actions. And then later you're potentially thinking about, how do I communicate this? What's the best approach for this?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay. I hear it. Yeah, because the thing is that sevens, with their enthusiasm and their risk tolerance, sometimes people can see that as foolhardy, or just they're able to kind of, sevens have a dynamic kind of ability to do things that other people don't necessarily think are possible. But with the self-preservation instinct, you're likely also seeing, is this the best use of my resources? And then with your kind of very confident and more assertive approach, I think you're a person that goes all in. Like, you don't really half-ass anything. So you're probably calculating, is this worth me going all in?
yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. So I think just from a diversity perspective, things to consider, knowing that all in, it has to feel right. You're going to take decisive action. You're going to run hard. Knowing that's your norm, one of the things you can potentially even look at and reflect on is to think about, okay, when might that not serve you or serve your outcome? Or when might you want to switch tactics? And that's not to say that that will be a majority. The goal here is not to change anything. It's about awareness so that you can more consciously leverage, but then also know when your default's potentially not serving you.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I don't expect other people necessarily to kind of do the things that I do the way that I do.
Mhm.
So for me, like you talk about in a diversity type conversation. So for me, like what running hard or what driving hard might look like for me is being intentional and like really committed to doing my inner work so that I can hold that space for someone else who might
Okay.
not like necessarily or easily like move into those kinds of conversations or into those types of awarenesses. So it's not about them like changing or growing, or no, it's just about there being space for you and me having done that work such that I can create that space.
Beautiful. There's also a heaviness to that, though. You know, that can be difficult given your own passion for your own growth and your own level of self-awareness. So that's just, regardless of your work, regardless of what context it's in. I know for myself, sometimes in other assessments I've taken where I score high as achiever, or in this case, if we look at the 3, your dedication to being better can sometimes potentially make, if someone doesn't have that same dedication or awareness or commitment to their own improvement, that may be more of a short-term versus a long-term relationship.
That is very accurate. That is extremely accurate.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things so we all have all 3 instincts. So self-preservation, you're looking at, is this worth the risk? Is this the right? I mean, probably in some ways it's from a relationship perspective. Do I trust this person? Am I safe in this environment? Is this an environment where I can impact change? Because on a basic level, self-preservation is about safety, and psychological safety. But I also think, because you are so driven to have a positive impact and be a positive force for change, you're also probably assessing, is this a place where that you see that you can actually have the impact you're intending? Because you're not one to suffer fools or waste time. You'll be polite about it, but it's not going to be where you're going to spend your time.
Yeah.
Especially also scoring as a maverick, right? Very innovative. Yeah. So after the self-preservation, one-to-one, and so then your social instinct, think about social not as an extroversion, but social as also kind of reading the kind of power dynamics of the room. Where's the power? Where are people maybe not being heard? I feel that you're very good at that, just knowing you in kind of a limited context, but you did score a bit lower on that as kind of being your last instinct, that you first focus on self-preservation, then you focus on your one-to-one relationships and the depth and intensity of those relationships, followed then by kind of looking at the room or the group as a whole. Does that feel true?
Yeah. Yeah. As in all things, I would say it depends, but I would definitely
Huh.
say that I would probably say default. That probably would be a default.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and sometimes, it's interesting. So we're opposite. I'm high social and low self-pres, but I use my social for self-pres. Like, people share their things with me. So maybe not their sleeping bags, but their power cords and things like that. So it's funny because we lean into different things to make sure that our needs are met. And then also, I know so much of your work is in service. So you're also leaning into perhaps even knowing what you've needed to create that psychological safety and create that environment for others. That's potentially a place where you're innovating from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that the whole like self-preservation, I guess for me, just kind of comes from having to be so independent
Hmm.
throughout my life. Um, you kind of have to, for me, it's been important to think about those things like the sleeping bag, like that's important to think about. And sometimes in the movement of it all, it's like, oh my God, I forgot that. I gotta do that.
Yeah. Well, but also those sevens are remarkably versatile. So I imagine even if you did forget the sleeping bag, you worked it out.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna worry about it. Yeah, we'll figure it out along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But there's that intentionality there. So as far as type 7, you have a choice on two sides of wings. Sometimes one of your neighbors has sugar and one of your neighbors has salt. You integrate your wings pretty evenly. So you have type 8, the active controller, intuitive, decisive, can be very confrontational and direct. Then on the other side, type 6, fiercely loyal, often looking at what's interesting is 7 looks at what is the infinite possibilities. 6 will sometimes look at what's kind of the infinite risk. What are all the things that could go wrong and how do they prepare? So you scored pretty evenly. So you have a kind of pretty even wing set. So you can kind of move into that more kind of decisive and directive. You can also move into the more kind of what are the needs of the group? What are the potential risks? Is this authority figure serving us or not? Or also be the authority. So one of the pages in your report that I would go to, not right now, but just kind of in review, I feel like pages 6 to 11 are pretty impactful. 11 should feel like it's ripped out of your journal because it's your type and your instinct layered on top of each other. Page 15 has to do with the wings, and it looks like you have a pretty nice wingspan. So as I talk a little bit about the 8 or talk a little bit about the 6, anything in particular resonate for you?
Um, I don't have any questions about it. I mean, yeah, it seems right. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's you have a very strong ability to, that was something even you scored very high in, is what's called helpful shifts. You're able to kind of move and shift and know, like, am I called to be the leader? Am I called to kind of lead from behind and make sure people have their needs met? Is this a moment I need to step in? Is this something where the leader maybe isn't serving us and needs to be challenged? So, but then, yeah, but then also as a 7, there's a way there's a way that it's still phrased in the positive. And so that's some of the magic of the 7 is the ability to, sometimes what will happen with a primary type 8 or a primary type 6 is that people can take offense or the kind of direct approach or the questions or anything. It's sometimes the message can get lost in the way that it's delivered. The level of positivity that you have as a 7 can, what I find, it puts just enough sugar on it that people are more likely to take the medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, and I would also say that sometimes I'm just thinking back in the past with some experiences where maybe that sugar wasn't there and the directness was there. It didn't go the way that I thought it would go. Um, People don't always read your intentions. Rarely do they.
Yes.
So
Yes. So I do think that it's important to moderate sugar because some people put so much sugar it dilutes the message.
right.
Some people don't put enough. As a type 7, you're likely to just kind of naturally put the right amount, but then also scoring as all of the assertive types, you put a little less. So sometimes I think that's part of assessing who you work with and what your impact is to see, not that you want to spend all your time code switching, but to see, who's a match for you and who and where can you be unfiltered and uncensored, and then where is the front door maybe not the best approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I do also, when we think about whether it's from a maverick perspective or whether it's from kind of your Enneagram perspective, you're good at being strategic and seeing the big picture and seeing the strategy. So one of the areas that you might not check as often is if and when the indirect approach may actually better serve, and is it possible if and when the indirect approach would serve with more speed?
Mm,
Because you're very direct and speed focused.
mhm.
So knowing either who to work with and partner with, given your strong networking, or when it may be best to look at a different approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that resonates. I mean, I'm just thinking about a number of times when I've was going to approach a particular topic and I talked to my wife about it, who's a little bit I mean, she's direct, but she also is very comfortable being indirect as well.
Mhm.
And so just thinking back to some of those times, she's like, I don't know if I would say it like that. Maybe like make it a little lighter. Like it doesn't need to be that serious, and
Yes.
maybe take it from this direction.
Yes. So be strategic with your pause because and then also I think from a coaching perspective, I think it's important to look at how often your natural serves you. Like, are we talking about 80% of the time, 70% of the time, 98% of the time, right? Like it did how much you potentially want to modulate or consider the alternate strategies that I'm suggesting depends on how much your norm actually serves you. But it sounds like your wife is a trusted person who can be like, hey, there's another door over here. You may not want to choose that door, but at least know about it as you pursue.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that Enneagram talks about, so this page 23 in your report, and I know I'm throwing these pages out, but these are just kind of the go-to ones after, is what's called growth through the lines. So one of the things that as a 7 kind of balances out, they'll go more towards type 1. They'll focus on how can I reform this? How can I make this stronger? How is this in line with my integrity? There's almost a kind of calming down of some of the enthusiasm of the 7. Sometimes 7s can get distracted with anticipating all that could be possible. And the ones are more focused on how do I deliver that, but can also get caught up in perfectionism. So I'm seeing your head nodding. It seems like this is resonating.
Yeah, well, it is, and I'm just thinking about as I've gotten older, how
Mhm.
I how I've been able to like the visions are more clear, and then there's also this appreciation for time and the role that plays in the rollout of the vision. Like it doesn't have to happen right now. There's time and there's a place for it, and I should use it.
Great. Yeah. Well, I mean, long game takes longer, right? but it's a better game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So take a look. That's one thing after our meeting. Take a look at page 23, just because on when it comes to your wings, you're really utilizing those potentially even kind of unconsciously. So I think it'll be good for you to look at it and see, is there anything consciously you want to leverage even more? Because your wings are very strong. Your lines are a little bit more underutilized. So take a look at, as you look at type 1, is there anything you want from that? Do you want to lean into that a little bit more? On the other side, on the other side of the line, we have the 5, and you lean into this a little bit more than the 1. The research. What's the research? Kind of where's the information, the kind of more kind of analytical components of it. This may be when you actually see yourself slowing down. More than likely, you would feel the need to slow down before you actually found the research. However, you score pretty evenly on the kind of feeling and the thinking side. So you score very high on all of the thinking. So your cerebral and thinking component may be the last thing you go to, but that might also be because you've normalized how much information you consume and think about even before taking action.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, in the sense that by the time I get to research information, this is not 100% of the case. Oftentimes I do learn things, but oftentimes by the time I get to the research, it's stuff that I already know and I've already acted on. So it's maybe it's confirmation, and it's further just kind of inspiration to continue on. But I think a part of that is attributed to just, you talk about the feeling side. So like really being in tune with a higher order of thinking, maybe whatever you want to call it, source, creator, whatever. And so that's really the direction that I go. And I that hasn't let me down. It just hasn't. So I trust it.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because as I look at how you scored on the report, even though your thinking center came up as the least expressed, you score very high in all the thinking types. So whether it's inspiration or
Mhm.
looking at caution and risk
Mhm.
or seeing what's possible, you likely almost even unconsciously lean into the more kind of cerebral thinking side. And so that's maybe even something to be very intentional about, because you might not realize how much that's feeding you.
Mm. Yeah, I think it does feed me, like in terms of like having a sense of clarity. It's like, okay, so I've got this clarity. Now, how do I want to go about this?
Mm,
That's where, and yeah, and I do acknowledge the use of the mind and use of strategies and masterminds and those kinds of things. Um, but that's second to like the vision and the feeling.
of course. Yeah. It also has to be engaging, and, exciting may not be the word,
Mm.
but as you look at type 7, it's the enthusiastic visionary, right? Both of those things are true. It's not just a visionary, it's an enthusiastic visionary.
Well, all
So
right.
yeah, so you're moving towards both of those things. You're running decisive action, you're making sure that the risks are addressed, that this is kind of the right thing. But I think one of the things to think about is also, because you score lower on the social instinct, not lower in a bad way, but just kind of as it's maybe more intentional, is thinking about when in your vision you have to take people with you.
Yes, yes, that is so true. And
Okay.
yes,
Okay, it seems like that's really resonating. Do you want to share more about that?
yeah. Well, I mean, I just think about now and what I'm doing with my company now. I mean, I've been building, and in order to gain further alignment with the vision that I see, I'm starting to see like, hey, not only is it wonderful to have other people on board with me, but that's a need, because there are opportunities that exist that are great opportunities. But for me as a visionary, if I spend my energy and my time there, it's going to slow me down. But this could be a great service to someone else. And I may even potentially benefit as a result of introducing this idea to them. So
there it is, network.
It really, it's like I have so many words to say about this, but it in terms of like when that is, how that's done, the intentionality through which it's done, like to create that kind of relationship, because I believe that, I don't want to just network, like that's important, but I really want to build relationships. Like I want to have relationships where that are that hydrate this system, if you will, of creation, and people feel comfortable with the give and exchange of communication and ideas. And when things are not going the way that they think that it should be going, or vice versa, there's a conversation, there's collaboration there, and there's not and I guess this goes back to the whole direct thing. Like, I don't want you hiding out. Don't hide out with your problems and your concerns. Like, let's put them on the table and let's talk about them.
Right. Most people are not comfortable with that. Right. So I think it's good. I'm the same way. I'm like, why didn't you tell me?
Right.
It's like, boss, we didn't want to tell you. It's like, oh, okay. Well, you should tell me to my face. So I think as you work with others, recognizing that that's your superpower, that's your strength, that's your norm, but also seeing that even if you don't change that norm, it can take time to cultivate that level of trust. So people, if that's not their instinct to tell you something is wrong in that way, they may need more proof. Whereas you're like, no, tell me what's wrong so we can address this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And it's why what's interesting is every time I go to an Enneagram training, I'm always helping people heal from very negative interactions they've had with eights. But I feel safest with the eights because I don't have to filter or censor. And yes, they may be so direct and say something that I'm like, oh, hey, that did not land well. But when I say it, it's like, oh, okay, that did not land well. Thank you for letting me know. Right. Like, and there's a relief that I have with it, because it's challenging for me, because I live in the direct and very positive approach, but I live such a, like, pretty similar to yourself. I score higher in 2 than I do in 3, but I'm so comfortable with the direct approach that often the kind of indirect, or when someone doesn't say something, sometimes it's hard for me not to see that as a breach of trust.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's taken work to see over time that, people have gifts and people have wounds that they bring to interactions that have nothing to do with us, that we're working through. But it's just, I share that that resonates with me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially that whole breach of trust thing, because I've had to catch that a few times, where it's like, what are you doing? Like, that just looks a little shady. Like, you don't have to be shady like that. You could just say what's on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, maybe that's not comfortable for them.
I would say usually it's not. And so that's why I actually brought up that of all the types that are most comfortable being assertive are 7, 8, 3. And because you scored so high in assertion, that's just so normal. And sometimes when someone comes at us with a different strategy, especially when you're used to the direct, it can feel underhanded, lack of trust, etc. So some of what we have to do is even just make space for that it's not that as we celebrate diversity, we're also celebrating diversity of approach.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things as a 7, and as you talk about working with your team, you're going to have so much you're going to be that enthusiastic visionary, be discerning about what you say no to, because sevens, I feel like, are more likely to say yes. Whereas your wings, eights are more likely to say no, do what they want, right? But they'll say yes, but do what I want. Sixes have kind of some more fear based. Is this worth the risk? This may not be worth the risk. So, one of the things to think about is, because you're able to see almost the kind of infinite possibilities, it can be very easy. And because you do run and you run hard, it can be very easy to become overextended, or try to be too many things to too many people. Now, because you score high in self-preservation, you likely have that kind of tap back into your own need. What do I need? How do I sustain this? But it's something to think about as your company grows and takes on a life of its own, that sometimes the answer to keep your freedom, to keep your versatility, which are so important to sevens, will be actually saying no instead of saying yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because I do say yes to a lot of things. Unless it's like, I feel like a really, really strong no. Like, I was asked to moderate this social media group thing, and I was like, that does not give me energy. Well,
Yeah.
you could expand your potential and your
No.
possibility. I was like, look, I'm some timey with that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be your guy. You're gonna be disappointed.
Yeah. So, because that's something to keep in mind, you may want to expand the range of your no. Because as a seven and as someone who scores high in what they call positive outlook, you're able to say it nicely. You're going to say it directly, but you're still going to say it nicely. But sevens are likely to be so focused on all the possibilities that they'll get overextended. Also, as you think about managing others and managing a team, they may not see what you see or be able to deliver what you deliver as that visionary founder. So, helping your people or clients to streamline may be helpful. So it's like, if you look at my website, it's like a candy store of seven, right? But because I'm an eight with a seven wing, I'm like, I'm going to execute on all these things, like all this possibility. But eights run so hard, they fall over wounded, and they'll still fight wounded. And sevens will commit to so many things, but then sometimes overcommit and not follow through. So the line between seven and eight, which is a line that you can live on very effectively and well, is where we say yes and execute on more than a lot of people do. So it's especially important to have, like, come back to yourself, Pres, come back to your body, so that it's not just, I said yes to all these people and then I said no to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Mhm.
So as far as kind of how we interact, you're much more likely to be assertive versus compliant or withdrawn. Keep in mind, sometimes there are exactly. I mean, it is significantly different. I know. I love it. I love that you can't even handle me saying that.
I don't know. I mean, within reason.
Oh no, totally.
Right,
Yeah, totally. But as you work with others or clients or even in personal relationships, people who say yes when they mean no, and people who don't answer because they don't want to say no to you. So it's something to think about, because I work with a lot of twos and I love them, bless them. But I was like, why won't you say no to me? Which, even like an eight, right? So I was like, no, why won't you say no to me? Well, they don't want to say no. They don't want to disappoint me. But then here's the thing, and one of the twos had to point this out to me. Even when they do say no, I negotiate. I'm like, oh yeah, we can make this happen, right?
They don't want to play that game.
They don't want to play that game. So they're withdrawing from that game. But someone had to tell me that they were opting out of that game, because I didn't realize that's part of why they wouldn't say no to me. And I was like, why won't people say no to me? I don't understand. Oh, because they're no, I'm still going to push on it. And it's already so hard for them to say. And then they're really going to have the force of me pushing on that. Because if I want it, like, let's go, baby. And I'm going to say it positively with my seven wing, but assertively, I'm going for it. And that does not work for everyone.
No. Yeah, it can be draining for them, for sure.
Yes. And the last thing I want to do is drain the people that I work with and care about.
Yeah.
So it's just, that is always going to be my approach. And, it's interesting. I just went on vacation and my friend was like, you negotiate all the things. So I was like, I got it. Right. Cause it's like candy. It's like toys, like what else can you give me? Okay. Well, like, it's part of the fun, but when you think about an 8, you know how when you are trying to take a toy away from the dog and the dog is like, oh, we're playing now. That's what the 8s do. And you're like, no, we're not playing. Like, you're not supposed to eat that. You're going to die. Right. But they're like, no, we're playing. We're playing. That's the 8s. That's the way the 8s show up. That's when you're in your 8 wing. Like that's sometimes part of the game for us. And so for me, part of the work has been, that's not most people's game. For most people, it's terrifying enough to try to take my chew toy, especially before I pull on it. And when I pull on it, they're like, oh, no, never mind. So assertive approach, I'm with you. That's part of why we are people, but it's important for us to, how are we making space for building the confidence of, and also making a supportive environment for our compliance and withdrawn.
Yeah.
And when, the friend of mine who did my Enneagram results, one of the development areas for me, she was like, what if you didn't negotiate for what you want? And I was like, like I can't even imagine it. But she was like, well, consider it, because that's not a comfortable place for an 8.
Yeah.
And I feel like for you, especially as a 7, but close to that 8, you know how to make that a win for everyone. You're like, no, we can make this a win, and like this is going to be positive for everyone. But there's a way that sometimes the boundless approach, like with 7s, I talk about those, like the toy that's rounded on the bottom where you knock it down, and as soon as you lift it up, it pops back up. I really should know what that toy is called, because that's my metaphor this time. Anyway, there's a resilience and a versatility, even in the face of no, even in the face of hardship, that we tend to have. And that's absolutely part of our strength. But there are other strategies for us to consider.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's so interesting because as I hear you talking about that, when I hear no, I go a couple different places. Usually when I hear no, depending on how emphatic that it is communicated to me, and even if the emphasis is like this undercurrent, like I'm listening for that undercurrent. If I hear that in any way, shape, or form, I'm like, oh, okay, well, cool. And I'll go find somebody else. Like I'm not gonna wait around for you.
We'll go around you.
Yeah, I'm not gonna wait around for that. And by the way, if things should change, the door is still open.
Exactly. Exactly. Uh-oh.
Unless you give me a reason to close. Yeah.
Okay, we froze.
All right. Are we still freezing?
I think we're coming back. Okay, here we go. I got you back. Okay. I think I heard that. Hopefully Zoom recorded it, but I think I got the crux of it. There is, but that's what I'm talking about with the resilience and the versatility. But also think about if and when you're sending out someone to negotiate on your behalf or on behalf of your company, they don't necessarily have that same resilience or that same attitude. It becomes a very helpful skill to teach people. But a lot of times what happens with the Enneagram is we have our normal, and then it's realizing, oh, this isn't normal. This is the way I view the world, as we look at 9 types or 27 instincts. And so kind of also knowing when an alternate strategy is best is actually knowing when it's time to fortify others, so they're able to look at it the way that you look at it.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of how we make money as coaches is you and I both scoring high in 7 and 8, is we help other people see the possibility and have the confidence to get it,
mm-hmm.
which is a lot of just how we live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when you don't get what you want, you're likely to be very positive about it. And then just shy of that, you'll react as well. So more than likely you will react positively, but there's likely to be some reaction. If someone says no, that's not necessarily the end of the conversation, unless there isn't trust or relationship. But I would imagine that the level of trust or relationship changes whether you revisit it. Some people will just make the best of it they can, or try to show their confidence, to just, hey, this is a bad situation. Let me kind of prove myself out of this or work my way out of it. So just a couple strategies to consider. We have our norms, but sometimes it's helpful to know what the other ones are. So for example, when I was in one of my trainings, I talked to a 9 who their primary strategy is withdrawal, whereas the 8's primary strategy is react. And I was like, well, how is withdrawal a strategy? And he was like, well, the river erodes the rock. I was like, it's true. Or sometimes when people ask for things and I'm not available, and then they sort themselves out by the time I get to them. So take a look as you look at the kind of wings and lines and these other strategies. We're not replacing your norm, but it's knowing that in the moment, can you reach for another thing, or would another thing actually serve? And as you think about your path and your success as an enthusiastic visionary, when might another tool, another approach, another style or person actually serve?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think also alongside of that, like, also, when is that persistence required?
Yeah.
That's a big place of discernment as well.
Okay.
I'm finding.
Yeah, good distinction. Yeah, and then with that discernment, also think about, as you continue to grow and develop your business, and if you choose to specialize or diversify, or kind of where you go, discerning to make sure 7s often have boundless energy, but it's figuring out what food do you need to maintain that. And then also, one of the things that comes up is anticipation. Is there so much anticipation that it's not a good thing, or can you see so many possibilities it can make it difficult to decide? You seem to be and kind of score as pretty like confident and decisive, but sometimes you may even want to reel that in to say, hey, what if I gave it another 5 minutes? Or this is what I think I'm going to do. What if we waited another day? And that's not to slow you down, just to slow you down, but it's also, sometimes if you injure your dominant hand, you develop the versatility and flexibility of your non-dominant, because you have to. So it's something, we don't have to be injured. We can sometimes do these things intentionally to develop our ability to leverage other strategies.
Yeah. It's funny going back to my wife again. She's always, when I have these big decisions, because I'm like, hey, this is a big decision, let's go, it's done. And she's like, maybe you should sleep on it. I'm like, no, I don't want to sleep on it, I want to go. And but every single time I sleep on it, I take her advice. I mean, it's almost like becoming my own advice. Well, wait, just calm down, let's just take a beat, sleep on it. And what I find is when I wake up the next morning, I have a whole other level of insight into that thing or that situation. It's like, I think we're gonna go a different direction.
Yeah.
Or it's like, yeah, no, this is solid, let's keep moving forward.
So either way, the time gave you fuel.
Yeah.
It sounds like. So I think it's a beautiful thing that you're able to directly, decisively, assertively, quickly go for things. And then you're also seeing that, at least for the big things, sometimes that, to put an 8 image on it, that additional time can give you an additional shielding, additional kind of power pack or whatever, fuel tank, right? To go with. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What's resonating for you?
I mean, all of it is resonating. What I really appreciate about this conversation is it's just, you know, like you talked about initially, is that it's making some like subconscious things more conscious. Like,
Yes.
oh, okay, yeah, this is a thing. I need to be aware of it. I feel like, yeah. So I don't feel like the assessment or whatever was off. I feel like that it was very much on point, and it's really just bringing things to the surface and inviting me to look more broadly at how I show up.
Right. Yeah. Well, and often I find that we don't necessarily know what our superpowers are because it's normal. It's just, of course you're an enthusiastic visionary. Of course you go confront things head on. Of course you're a positive person who sees the possibility. So sometimes what can be helpful is when you see from an assessment perspective, oh, like these are the things that stand out to me. Those may actually be really fun kind of swim lanes or zones of genius for you to lean into and have more energy. Because you are so self-aware, you're likely really good at looking at what do I not know or not do, and how do I address that. But sometimes, just as in looking at other strategies to knowing when alternatives serve us, also making sure we're really kind of leaning into what we're good at naturally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's also really good to learn a little bit more about you as well,
Yeah,
Dana.
good.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank
that's
you. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing, and thanks so much for letting me record.
yeah, you bet.